Welcome to Attachment Matters, a series of conversations between two moms who love to nerd out on the subject of attachment. We'll dive into what it is, what it isn't, what it relates to, what it can mean for parenting, and how it can help us explain the current state of things. Rose was introduced to Dr. Gordon Neufeld's attachment-based developmental model when her two sons were very young, and it has significantly shaped her life. She brings a depth of knowledge from the work of Dr. Gordon Neufeld, having taken a number of courses at the Neufeld Institute. This series offers her the opportunity to share insights from this model with parents who are trying to make sense of their trans-identified children.
As a mom of two teens and a former classroom educator, StoicMom has an intense interest in attachment and development. She's done some serious dabbling into the Neufeld bank of knowledge, but also has a knack for scanning the environment for frameworks to discover where they overlap and where they diverge. In her work supporting parents of trans-identified kids, she's committed to making sense of how we find ourselves grappling with things like gender identity and the other ways that our kids are struggling to find their place in this world. Both of us found ourselves entangled in the world of gender ideology, following very different routes to get here. We share a passion for the attachment framework as a way to understand and fulfill our roles and responsibilities as mothers in these oh so strange times.
In this episode, Rose and I tackle SMP community member questions, and we end up exploring how adaptation and maturity are related, describing what that painful process looks and feels like so you can recognize when it's happening. We also discuss the role of raising children and the dark night of the soul in developing our own maturity and in keeping our hearts soft enough to hold on to our kids.
Well, hello.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm both excited and nervous, I guess, about doing our first Q&A, but I'm looking forward to seeing where we go. And I just want to say thank you to the members of your community who submitted questions. I've read them all over, and I'm both excited and, again, it's a little intimidated with wanting to do just justice to what the mothers here have shared and are asking and exploring and seeking. So so thank you, just from the bottom of my heart, for taking the time to reflect and ask these questions. And I will walk humbly as we start to respond and explore what you all have brought to us today.
Amazing questions, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these moms are they're so committed and so thoughtful in their questions, and clearly they are invested in learning and doing what they can, to be the moms that they want to be and to take care of themselves, which is so important. And that's really what this community is. So these questions came from the SMP Online Community Center, which is, the SMP stands for the Stoic Mom Project. And these moms are part of an online community. We do meet live several times a month, but there's an online forum. It's very growth oriented. Our focus is on resourcing ourselves, which comes up in some of these questions. But that one of the benefits of being in that community is being invited to submit their questions for Q&A with experts that join us on the Stoic Mom Project. And so with Attachment Matters being under the Stoic Mom Project umbrella, at least for the time being, that's who we reached out to for questions. So yes, and I am with you. Thank you to these amazing moms who are so dedicated for these really thoughtful questions that we already know we're not going to be able to answer all in one episode. Yeah, we'll have to break this episode into parts. And I guess with that, let's dive in.
That sounds great.
Okay, so what we'll
S-
do is read the question. Um, one of us will read the question and then we'll just jump in together to answer it.
That
Does that
sounds
sound all
great.
right for you? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll read the first one.
Okay.
So, question one, it's interesting to listen to attachment matters through the lens of what we as mothers need, as opposed to our children's attachment needs. I think about the advice that we need to become the mother that our children need. I want to know more about the change that happens when we mature from the seeking attachment to the providing attachment instinct. How do we resource ourselves to do this work? That's a great question.
Hmm. I mean, how do I become the mom my child
Hmm.
needs me to be? Right?
Hmm.
That's what I hear there.
Hmm.
I think we've mentioned before, maybe in different language, that what parenting demands of us may be part of and even crucial to human maturation, that we don't fully mature into our capacity until we have met the demands of parenting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this kind of that self-sacrifice, both the self-sacrifice and the stretching to be that provider.
Yes, and self-sacrifice can be a controversial word choice. Maybe we need to unpack that a little bit. Yeah, because I would say too, this is where our messages might seem to diverge a little bit. And I don't think that they do necessarily. And I think that's because what this does demand of us will feel like some self-sacrifice for sure.
Yeah, I think what I meant by that, just at a basic level, is just everything we do as a mother, everything we do as a parent
Hmm.
is sacrifice. And in so many ways, it's um, you know, putting maybe our needs, and I know this is controversial in our culture, but putting our needs second in order to provide for the needs of our children from, my gosh, pregnancy, childbirth, I mean, just from infancy onward, it is, I do see that as just an ongoing commitment and showing up to sacrificing. Um, so that's just my framework that I know it's kind of a loaded term, but I guess I just kind of see it as one of the vehicles of our growing up through parenting is learning that we have to no longer be the only one that we are taking care of, that we are taking care of others. Um,
Hmm. I love that you use framework, and I think that I might offer a reframe and see what you think of, rather than thinking we are sacrificing our needs, maybe what we're sacrificing is our wants.
mm, mhm, mhm.
We no longer get all the things we want or get to do
Sure,
all the things we did in the past because we
sure,
do have to be thinking about this other being who is completely dependent on us.
right.
And so we're having to give up or sacrifice, certainly, things that we would
Mhm.
normally do and participate in and
Yeah,
have. and
right.
and in that sacrifice is the development of the capacity to be the alpha in this relationship with this
Mhm.
being.
Right.
Okay.
And I want to kind of the question here. I want to know more about the change that happens when we mature from the seeking attachment to the providing attachment instinct. So I want to speak directly to that.
Hmm.
We always have both instincts. So it is not that when we mature, we are now just full on provider instinct. We're alpha all the time. That is not the case. Um, and I'm looking forward to going more into the alpha in the future, because there's a whole, our children can also be alpha children. And that is I think a lot of what, the books that are coming out right now
Hmm.
that are trying to figure out what's going on with young people,
Hmm.
um, in terms of, depression, anxiety, all of these manifestations of things going wrong in our culture. Hmm. I think one of the elephants in the room that people just don't know how to talk about or speak to or even see is this idea of a child becoming an alpha child. So, all of this is to say that children have both instincts, adults have both instincts. We carry these instincts throughout the lifespan. And I think the as we are able to be the caring alpha. So what happens sometimes when children go into alpha, they're not necessarily a caring alpha, they're not mature enough to
Hmm.
perform alpha in that way,
Hmm.
or to
Hmm.
carry it out in that way. They can be, a 2-year-old can certainly cradle an infant and be full of those caring and providing instincts. Um, but when they're put in an alpha relationship vis-a-vis the parents, that's when things get really funky.
Hmm.
Um, so with all that being said, um, I just first of all want this mom to know that alpha and maturation are related, but they're not synonymous. They're two very important interrelated dynamics. Um, but we can kind of, pull them apart a little bit. When we mature, what happens when we mature? I'll go back to that part of the question. This is like the subject of a 15-week Neufeld Institute course, to
Hmm.
get to really talk to every, initially just give initial explanation to these aspects. But what we're really seeking is sort of what would be called an integrated prefrontal cortex.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the ability to, have on the one hand and on the other hand. So this is another culturally loaded term, even on sort of in the current heterodox, dissident counterculture. People are always saying cognitive dissonance, like it's a terrible
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
And I struggle with this because I don't totally understand. I don't totally understand the way that this term is used by people. But what I will say is that being able to see on the one hand and on the other hand, to have mixed feelings is one of the most, defining factors of maturation, of
Hmm.
maturity.
Hmm. Hmm.
And in terms of that lifespan, again, what Neufeld talks about is when we're looking at like a toddler, a preschooler, their prefrontal cortexes are not integrated. They're physically impossible. It's just so these early expectations we have to our young children to not be impulsive, to, behave, to be socialized,
Hmm.
um, he calls it form over spirit, just
Hmm.
why can't they
Hmm.
just be, civilized, well, that comes with maturity. It's not taught. It's, these fruits of this developmental outcome. So he talks about that 5 to 7, that kind of 5 to 7-year-old age, as this being the first potential for a child to actually begin to have, on the one hand and on the other hand, to have mixed feelings and integration. But if you're a sensitive child, and I know some
Uh-huh.
of the questions that the moms have
Hmm.
brought, whether we get into this topic today or next time, are around things like ADHD or, autism spectrum. His his construct for some of explaining what we throw around with those terms is this idea of hypersensitivity, which we'll come back to.
Hmm.
But what I want to say here is that if you have a sensitive or a hypersensitive child, that maturation is going to take longer. It's going to take longer because of the defenses that kick in that block the ability for that attachment to develop, which one mom spoke to really specifically in her question, and also for children to have vulnerable emotions because the attachment and the vulnerable emotions are both key ingredients that facilitate maturation.
Okay.
So,
I have a,
yeah.
oh, did you have a thought to finish
No,
there?
jump in. I was going to kind of speak to another part of the future question and this question where it, what happens in adolescence, what people are right, that some of that is lost. Kids can go back into a less mature state as a part of that developmental process.
Okay. So we'll put a pin in that
Yeah,
because
let's put a
yes,
pin in that.
that's
Yeah.
almost specifically asked in a future question.
Mm-hmm.
I have a clarifying question
Please,
that
yeah.
is related to this one when it comes to the seeking and providing attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hearing you explain that we have both instincts
Mm-hmm.
from birth. Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so we're born with these instincts, but I'm curious, in any given relationship,
Yes.
can that, are you in one role or the other? Can that role shift in the relationship? And is it always the case, even in, because I remember you saying something about peer to peer as well, that that relationship is always hierarchical and one is in one role or the other. Is that correct?
Yes. So that gets that. Thank you for taking me there. I kind of went, woo, I always do this. Like, if we got to start the beginning, go all the way through the whole thing. So suffice it to say, the maturation takes place over different developmental stages of life,
Mm-hmm.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in terms of the alpha and the seeker, yes. Let's talk about a marriage.
Okay.
Ideally, we are, it is reciprocal. We are taking turns
Mm,
being alpha independent. Sometimes I am seeking, I need you to hold me. I need you to be bigger than whatever insecurity or heartache or struggle I'm bringing to you. I'm seeking for you to take care of me.
mm-hmm.
And other
Mm-hmm.
times, whether it's the husband and the wife, we're taking turns caring for one another, being that alpha provider. With my partner, we joke about, you know, one day or for one week, she'll be that alpha for the entire family.
Mm-hmm.
She
Mm-hmm.
won't get stressed out. She won't lose her temper. She'll be able to be calm when we're, the kids are, really pushing our buttons, really difficult. And I'll be losing it every second, and then
Mm-hmm.
something
Mm-hmm.
clicks and it's like we switch. And then all of a sudden I'm in a much better place and she's falling apart. And there's that dance of, and it's almost like, oh, okay, so you're in a bad mood now. So that's why I'm in a good mood. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like
Mm-hmm.
we're each in that dance of seeking and providing from one another and for the family and
Mm-hmm.
for the children. And so I
I
don't know if
could,
that helps or not, but yes.
I want to just reinforce that a little bit and talk about my own experience with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
For the longest time, I often felt like, why does it always have to be me? Why am
Mm.
I,
Oh yeah.
why is this burden, of sort of holding the container for the entire family, that sort of emotional
Mm-hmm.
container, I
Mm-hmm.
think,
Mm-hmm.
always fall on me.
Mm-hmm.
If I am dysregulated, the whole household is dysregulated. There's nobody to hold space for me. Um, and I think I did need to mature. I had to get
Mm-hmm.
to a place where I could ensure my husband felt held and at rest. so that he could, when it was his turn, provide it for me. And
Yeah.
it was an interesting growth opportunity for me, that I that I happily can report, I think has
Mhm.
happened. And now it is interesting to be able to see that. It's like, oh, I can be dysregulated. And the way he just moves in and takes that alpha role
Mhm.
is it's so
Mhm.
supportive. Like that's the
Yeah.
word that comes to mind. I can
Yeah.
be at rest in
Yep.
this relationship. He's got my
Yes.
back.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
So I'm thinking too, when we're talking about children,
Hmm.
it is inappropriate, I would imagine, for them to ever feel like they are in the alpha role when it comes to the parent-child relationship.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. That is different. So it can kind of be broken down when we go back to that concept of attachment being hierarchical.
Hmm.
In a hierarchical relationship, parent child, grandparent child, teacher child, adult child relationship, it is to be in right relationship, quote unquote, is for
Hmm.
the adult to be in the lead,
Hmm. Hmm.
to be the compass point, the guide, the orienter, and that alpha provider. Now, when children are nested in hierarchical relationships with other children, like a
Hmm.
adolescent with you know, uh, a younger child, or even, like I said, a 2-year-old with a baby,
Hmm. Hmm.
alpha, it can be beautiful for that child because they're taking care of the less vulnerable,
Hmm.
or I'm sorry,
The more,
the more vulnerable,
hmm.
the more
Hmm.
dependent.
Yes.
But when a child is put in the role of caretaking for an adult, it's we're not meant to. It's not meant to be that way. We're not
Hmm.
wired that way.
Hmm.
Um, it's something that happens often, but you can kind of see this with I hate to use this example, but you know, some parents who kind of say the child's in charge of their own emotions. Like like as a mother, my child is in charge of me feeling good.
I was going to bring that up because I do think that happens in this particular situation. And this, I know this is going to be a delicate area to to tiptoe into, but I want to admit I did it.
Totally. Oh, how can you? It's it's so hard not to.
Yes, yes, but I think for some time there, and I think this affected my daughter's ability to have that psychological intimacy with me
Yeah,
when what she was going through was causing me so much distress,
yeah,
and I could not tolerate what this was bringing up for me.
yeah,
And so I was not behaving like an alpha,
yeah,
like I could handle what we were moving through.
yes, yes,
And so, of course, it makes sense to me that they are going to stop coming to us
right.
if
To
that
get
is
their
the
needs met.
impact it's, well, and yes, to get their needs met. And when it's causes so much distress for mom, I, I just, I'm trying to capture that in words. Um, it's that flip-flop of the role, though, that I think probably feels so unnatural, and they're gonna reject it and withdraw, separate.
Yep.
Hmm. Which tends to then exacerbate what mom is going through. And again, been there. It was so painful and confusing and
Yeah.
difficult. Hmm.
Yeah. I feel like if I was teaching a Neufeld course with a slide deck, I would do a better job of really kind of giving a visual or pulling apart like what is maturation, um, alpha and seeker, how they're, and then the attachment deepening, because they are all so interrelated, but there's unique kind of distinctions of them as we pull them apart. But I think that what you just illustrated as you spoke is a very good example of that. This question. You were moving from seeking from your daughter
Hmm.
to get you out of this the very difficult emotions of this experience. And you eventually moved into, no, I have to be the provider.
Hmm.
I have to be the one that is you know, taking care of my daughter. She can't be the one to take care of me. And I think there is something in that movement that does help us grow up.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's not the only factor of our growing up, but I think it helps that process along. Does that make sense in terms
It
of the
does.
question that this mom is asking?
It does
Or
make sense.
Mhm.
It speaks to something else that I talk about often as far as reorienting to what's happening, and using the context of this very destabilizing, painful thing
Yeah,
to grow yourself up, to
yeah,
ask yourself the questions. The question she's asking right here, how do I resource myself
hmm,
to have the capacity to hold this messiness?
yeah. Um, what comes to me is this concept of play.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Okay. Say more.
Sometimes we talk about self-care. We talk about, you know, so there's so many different ways we could go with the resourcing of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I've got an idea.
Yeah,
And I think I know where you're going with play. And but I think before we can get there, we have to experience the futility,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
um, and and go through the grief
yeah,
and adaptation component of this. Does that make sense? So then, what do we need to drop into our tears of sadness,
yeah,
to really feel and move through the grief and disappointment of
yeah,
not getting what we want?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. That's so helpful. Um, so let's talk about that.
Hmm.
So, what are the conditions we need to cry?
Hmm.
So, when we talk about this idea of facing futility, when we're up against something that we cannot change,
Hmm.
and mentally, we may be like, I know I can't change this. So, part of the battle is like getting our heads around it.
Hmm.
But to actually
Yes.
move through the feeling of futility, to actually
Hmm.
feel it, um, we kind of do need um, some conditions to
Hmm.
be conducive to that for ourselves.
Yes.
So, what are some of those potential things? Well, one would be a loving relationship with our spouse or with
Hmm.
another friend or family member, or, let's say if you are, have a church or,
Hmm.
a place where you have a confidant, whether it's a pastor or a priest, um,
Or a coach.
a coach, yes, your coach, um, you know, someone who you feel safe with,
Hmm.
um, safe enough to be vulnerable.
Who
That's
can hold the container for your emotion?
yes,
Yes.
who
Hmm.
you can disclose and be known to,
Hmm. Hmm.
and perhaps in that your heart is soft enough that you can allow for those tears to flow. Now, I am a sensitive person.
Yeah, me too. Hmm.
So even when I talk and disclose, I don't always find my tears. They do
Mm,
not come easy for me. So
mm.
that's where play actually does come in.
Okay.
One of the ways plays come in. My wife knows if I have to cry, she's gonna put on some music.
Mm,
She's
mm-hmm,
gonna press play on whatever that melancholy or that beautiful background music is. And like that, and my son is the same way. You put on that music and the tears start to flow.
okay. How interesting that you said I'm sensitive, so my tears
Don't come easy.
don't come easy. When I said I'm sensitive, it's because my tears come very easily. I don't have a
Mm,
hard time accessing my tears, I think.
mhm.
I guess it depends on the situation. I've been really paying attention to that lately.
Interesting.
The times that they come easily and the times that they don't. But okay,
Yeah.
so so finding those the word container is what comes to mind, right? Or
Yeah.
the safe places, which can also be a really triggering phrase for people,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
sort of safetyism that has become the buzzword and what we're trying to avoid. But when we do need that safety to have
Yeah.
our emotions, those
Yeah.
emotions are important. They are part of the adaptation process.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
skip the emotions is to not
Right.
adapt.
Yeah. Yep. And you're naming it right there, that adaptation process, which Neufeld would, his construct for that is futility. It is having
Hmm.
our tears when we're up against something we cannot change.
Hmm.
It's the off ramp for when something is not working, that frustration, instead of going into the attacking impulses,
Hmm. Hmm.
the way we can release it sometimes. It's kind of what people say, that it sounds almost like a cliche, taking mad to sad. But
Hmm.
it is that the feeling of futility, the having our tears, it literally changes our brains.
Anger is sad's bodyguard.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
yes, how do
Yeah.
you move from mad to sad? Yes. Okay.
So that adaptation is one of those factors that is a part of maturation.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you hit it right on the head. It's both a resource for us
Hmm.
to resource ourselves, and it is a vehicle for helping us
Hmm.
to grow up. So that's pretty awesome.
So we use the Stoic phrase often, the obstacle is the way. Like the
Mm,
community members hear that so often. But
hmm.
that's what we're getting at here. And that's what
Yeah.
I mean by the reorientation. Most of us,
Mm,
when we feel this discomfort, the intense feelings that we are going
hmm.
to experience when we are bumping up against futility and we don't
Hmm.
get the thing we thought we could have, we distract ourselves. We we move away from those emotions.
Yeah.
We get stuck in anger.
Hmm.
We get stuck in our story that it shouldn't be this way,
Right.
which keeps us stuck in anger. If that's where we
Hmm.
are not allowing the adaptation process,
Hmm.
which, as you said, is maturity. So that's why I talk about reorientation all the time, because
Hmm. Hmm.
the more you do it, the more capacity you have.
Yeah.
It is how we develop. It is how
Yeah.
we mature. And
Yeah.
so recognizing that makes the process, I think, less scary.
Yeah.
And then if you have those people that, like you said, you can be at rest with,
Hmm.
that can share that space with you while
Yeah.
you process through and grieve. and allow
Yeah.
the tears.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that feeling of rest is a outcome of the tears.
Mm-hmm.
If you
Mm-hmm.
um, kind of after a good cry, so to speak,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
one can feel renewed and softened. And and it is that softened place that I think we need
Yes.
to rebuild our relationship or
Mm-hmm.
maintain a relationship with our child.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
This
yeah, accessing that softened place is also an indicator of your maturity. And each time we move through an experience of futility, we develop our capacity.
yeah, we do. We do. Yeah.
And that is what matures us into the mom that can hold the space for our kids
Yeah.
to move through their own futility.
Yes. Oh yeah, because that's the gonna, that's huge for these kids.
Hmm.
And that's what's gonna help them grow up too, you know.
Hmm. Hmm. So I guess how too can we encourage moms to notice when this is happening, maybe, um, or consider something in their lives where this was demanded of them.
Mm,
And it's interesting. In our first episode, we talked about how this happens on the daily most
mm-hmm,
of the time,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
where we can find ourselves
mm-hmm,
stuck in traffic
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and frustrated and angry and
Oh
this
yeah.
shouldn't be
Whew.
happening. I need to be where I need,
Yep. Oh yeah.
and what happens when you're able to let it go, to move
Yeah.
through the feelings and let it go. And and that lightness you feel on the other side,
Yeah.
the rest.
Yeah. Well, I have an example just from my own life this morning.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the getting out the door to school, and we have a very small house, and so we don't have like a mud room, we don't have a foyer, it's just the door to the garage is in the kitchen.
Hmm.
And there's four of us, and my sons fight all the time, and we always hit this log jam
Hmm.
where no one's moving out the door. Everyone's trying to get shoes and boots and coats on, and and so I've maintained my calm all morning, best of intentions to be maintaining a good relationship with my children. And my older son, I'm like, get your shoes on and go out the door. So he gets his shoes on and he stands up to put on his coat, and then he walks in the opposite direction. And I'm like, you need to go out the door, and then I lose it. I lose it. My frustration is over the top, so I grab my stuff and
Hmm.
I'm going to storm out the door. Well, this is me. Of course, one of the things I have is a plate with an egg sandwich on it, no cover. I've got the plate like I'm grabbing all my stuff. I forget I have a sandwich on a plate. The sandwich falls on the dirty rug, which makes me even more frustrated because this is really not, if we're talking about frustration, is something not working for us.
Hmm.
This whole
Hmm.
thing is not working, and my maturity has gone out the window. My prefrontal cortex mix is gone,
Hmm.
and I am like kicking the garage door, slamming the car doors. Everybody gets in the car because Friday morning is like when the whole family drives to school together. It's our
Hmm.
special time, and here I am. I am now in my 4-year-old zone, totally just in a state of frustration, temper. I've lost my mix, is what Neufeld would call it. I do not have a prefrontal cortex mix, and I'm just so mad at the world, and I'm pouting in the front
Uh-huh.
seat.
Uh-huh.
And so we drive, and we're about to get the audiobook on that we listen to. And then it's like finally I soften up enough to make a joke.
Hmm.
to my partner where I'm just like, oh, why would you want to listen to this audiobook when you could be
Hmm.
engaging with me right now? And I made a joke. I kind of made fun of
Hmm.
myself, but it was that lightening up, getting back into that place. So it's like when I use that concept of play, we haven't really started to talk about it yet, but the play can be the melancholy. It can be what gets us to our tears because it's an indirect entrance to those of us who are defended, are in a
Okay.
state of defense.
Okay.
But the play can
Yes.
also be light. It can also be
Yes.
making a joke out of it. And that can help soften us up too. Um, so each of us is going to have a different access point
Hmm.
to letting down the defenses.
It's funny, I tell a very similar story in my reflection titled Road Trip. And maybe I'll just steer listeners toward that. It is in my reflections along the way tab. And you can listen to it. That's one that has
Yeah.
a voiceover if you want, or just read.
Yeah. So it's all
This,
to say we're going to have these explosions.
mm-hmm,
We are going to lose our integrated prefrontal cortex in the heat of the moment when things are not working.
mm-hmm,
Okay, we're going to act immature. We're going to lose our tempers. We're going to be just foul frustration all over the place. I'm kicking the doors, I'm slamming them. But it doesn't mean we can't recover. It doesn't mean we can't come out of it in ourselves and in relationship to our families, whether it's our spouses or our children or both.
mm-hmm,
Um, and it doesn't mean that we are hopelessly immature. It's we're riding these waves, the best we can. And maybe that how do we resource ourselves to do our work? Another way we resource ourselves is self-acceptance
mm-hmm,
and forgiveness,
mm-hmm. Yes,
because we're going to
yes,
make mistakes
yes.
all the time.
Well, and each time that happens, we are modeling, and
Yeah.
we haven't talked about the traffic circle. I don't think we have
Mm-mm.
specifically moved through that imagery. I because I think that is also a resource, is to understand the process so that you can
Yes.
recognize where you are in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that gives you some choices. You know,
Yeah.
I can continue to be frustrated. Am I able to change this situation? Right? Because that's
Hmm.
what frustration is asking of us. Can I change this? And then when you can recognize, oh, maybe not. Like,
Yeah.
I am stuck in this traffic jam, or I did just lock the keys in my car, which is what
Yeah.
the road trip story is about. There's a little teaser. You know, um, can I exit? Like you said, the off ramp, right?
Yeah.
Can I exit
Hmm.
this experience and find a playful approach to what's
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah.
Because once we're out of the traffic circle, or we take that off ramp, that is that moment of acceptance. It is what it
Yeah.
is. What do I do with that? And it's
Yep.
interesting that when you get off there, the shift that you experience,
Hmm.
you play comes easily almost. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
how do we make this fun now?
Yeah. Because part of the acceptance is not only what wasn't working,
Mm-hmm.
but your reaction to it. Got to accept both things.
Mm,
Once the
mm-hmm.
frustration has exploded for
Mm-hmm.
me, like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I've got to accept that getting out the door is hard. It's always going to be hard.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, I just acted like a 4-year-old and
Mm-hmm.
I'm embarrassed and I am needing to do some repair
Mm-hmm.
with my children,
Mm-hmm.
and I can do that.
Mm-hmm. And I guess we should also point out that if we don't get off here, I guess we are going through the traffic circle. It moves into, it looks more aggressive, right? That's what it
Attacking.
attacking. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And when we can recognize this in our children too, when they are
Yep.
also in frustration, um, if we have the maturity to
Yeah.
help them either find the resources they need to change the situation or exit the traffic circle
Yeah.
with some radical acceptance before they move into aggression.
Yeah.
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 Um, so we can certainly, you know what? I actually have an article that describes this.
Oh,
I don't know. You
great.
might have something else that has a visual. This one doesn't. It just
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
describes this process so parents
Mm-hmm.
can read through that and understand the importance
Mm-hmm.
of the adaptation process and how integral it is to maturity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and then I just want to reinforce what you said about the self-acceptance
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
forgiveness and finding compassion for ourselves, being patient with ourselves as we are going through this, because it's going to be
Yeah.
one adaptation opportunity after another.
No kidding.
The obstacle is the way.
No kidding.
And you're
Yeah.
doing it. You're doing it right now. If you have this awareness, and you are doing what you can to mature yourself, recognizing the process, having a community to support you in that, knowing who your people are,
Yeah.
um, and then the patience to
Yep. Oh,
keep at
yeah.
it. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Another analogy that Neufeld uses just reminds me of this is I think I've mentioned it maybe in a past episode. It's the idea of walking the maze.
Hmm.
Sometimes you're going to hit a wall.
Hmm.
You're going to try your most earnest, sincere, heartfelt attempts to connect with your child or for something to work. And you're going to hit that wall, whether it's because of your own reactivity or, your child, not being open to you, so many different things that cannot work. And it's like, go to bed that night, wake up the next morning, try again, you know,
Hmm.
turn to the left, turn to the right, try
Hmm.
something different, but keep walking.
We are all the projects of a lifetime.
Yep.
I've heard Lisa Marciano say that, and that one just really stuck with me.
Yeah.
That this is
Yeah.
life. Life
Yeah.
is the maze.
Yeah.
And we are equipped to navigate the maze.
Yeah. We
But
are.
that's how you navigate it is by
Yeah.
hitting walls.
Yep. Hitting up against that futility. Yeah, exactly.
Hmm. Hmm.
I feel like, should we move to the next kind of
Yes.
couple questions?
Well, and I think that was a
Or,
great base to
yeah.
answer the rest of the questions from,
Yeah. I
so
agree. I
yeah.
agree. Thank you.
So this next one, growing up, I had a healthy attachment to my nuclear family. Like many older adults, one of my parents has died and my other parent is suffering from mental decline. In 2020, my closest friend died. During the trans nonsense, I suffered from what Peter Boghossian calls an identity quake. My woke adjacent worldview no longer served me, and my wide circle of friends and extended family still hold this worldview. I had to separate from them to protect my daughter. I am very wary of adopting another pre-digested worldview. As a result, it's lonely and exhausting exploring these concepts in a vacuum, honing my inner compass without anyone in real life to bounce ideas off of. As you say, we are creatures of attachment. I miss being known. Any advice on how to nurture this maturation in ourselves?
Should we read the next one too? Just because it's
Yeah.
similar. So
Yes.
can I jump on that reflection and her question about resources for this season of isolation and loneliness? I too have dropped or distanced myself from the majority of my social group. This has reduced the raw edges of hurt that come from so many painful interactions, but I am so sad. I am a bit lost to know what steps to take next. Like many of you, I don't want to reflexively align with another contrary worldview. Any ideas would be appreciated.
So this came up, I believe, in the last episode where we
Mm-hmm.
were talking about being peer attached as adults.
Yeah.
So I think there's some of that happening here.
Yeah.
And it can be very lonely work.
Yeah.
I think so few people are actually engaged in it
Yeah.
that once you sort of move into this, and I also want to, if I could point out, and I'm not sure of Neufeld's ideas on this, but I'm thinking of Carl Jung and others who have done work over the lifespan, right, of human
Mm-hmm.
development,
Mm-hmm.
that there is this period in midlife, of
Mm-hmm.
this sort of midlife personality development, which is what we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about
Mm-hmm.
before, really,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is that life is going to give us these circumstances that are going to demand of us to deal with our futility,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and to
Mm-hmm.
use it to mature ourselves. And there are so many different ways that this is described. This is not new knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
this is
Mm-hmm.
something we figured out over and over and over again. And so the reason I say that is because it's a normal human experience. And I just want to
Mm-hmm.
reinforce that,
Yeah.
that there is a purpose for the dark night of the soul, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
sometimes called a dark night of the soul. In the theory of positive disintegration, that's what it's called, positive disintegration. It and
Mm-hmm.
or depression sometimes, right? It is these circumstances that can thrust us into um, pain, painful
Yeah.
circumstances that we feel physically, that really demand, really, that's the word that keeps coming to mind to me is demand our maturation. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think even just recognizing that it's normal is helpful, that
Mm-hmm.
other people might have a really hard time understanding what's happening for you. They
Yeah.
might not be able
Yeah.
to relate to it,
Yeah.
and so there will likely be a very lonely phase of this. And
Yes.
as you move through, I think you'll find resources like the universe will show up for you
Mm-hmm.
if you're open to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of want to point out to these moms, they found their way
Mm-hmm.
to the center, they
Yeah.
found other moms who are going through this. And I know
Yeah.
how hard it can be to not have that in real life. I don't really have it in real life either.
Mm.
Um, but it is interesting who you will then attract into your life as you continue to move through the work, I think, and who
Mm-hmm.
falls away. And I don't think it has to be a conscious thing like I have to cut these people out of my life. I think you'll just find that naturally you're spending less time with people who can't get what you're going through.
Yeah.
Um, but it gets better, I guess, is also what I want to say. And
Yeah.
and as you move through it, you'll find that you're having a different experience and that the people that start showing up for you understand a little better,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. And those that don't upset you as much as maybe they used to
Yeah.
because of that maturity, I think, that gets developed
Yeah. I
and
think
that
so
soft heart.
too.
Hmm.
Yeah. I am experiencing that just in my own trajectory. It will be 3 years since the, you know, my woke belief system crumbled to the ground, and um, it will be 3 years next month. So I have found that at different stages of my journey, I was in more of a pursuit, an attachment pursuit of both information, but also new friend,
Hmm.
people that moving from one camp to this other. And it took me time It took
Hmm.
me time to kind of, well, number one, the dark night of the soul, 100%. My
Hmm.
gosh, I never imagined
Right.
going through this. I
It
would,
brings you to your knees.
I would never, ever, ever go, I would never have it any other way.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I would never want to have not it, for my life trajectory. If I had a
Hmm.
different life and, we can imagine how things could be different. But for where I was to where I am now, I am so grateful for that dark night of the soul. I am so grateful, though saddened by some of the loss, you know, but I also, yeah, I just feel a richness of spirit, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, that I could never have imagined.
Yeah. I feel the same. I feel the same. What I got out of moving through this and there's no other way, unfortunately. I think that's why the dark night of the soul exists. It has to be this painful
Yeah,
to inspire us to move through it.
yeah,
To ins-
yeah,
it has to hurt bad enough that we'll do what we need to do to build that capacity.
yeah, yeah,
And it feels like
yeah.
you're dying
Oh, it does. Yeah,
because in some ways you are.
yeah, yep, yep. I agree.
Mhm.
I agree. I think another aspect of, let's just say for myself, and I don't know if the moms who will be listening or who ask these questions could relate to this. Another huge visceral aspect of this is the alarm.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
being in that intensity of alarm
Mhm.
does make us a little vulnerable and just makes sense to grasping onto the next thing
Mhm.
because we need something to hold on
Mhm.
to. And I think as we come out of the alarm,
Mhm.
as that destabilization, as whether it's because we are growing more into, we're finding the support. So the support that your moms are finding with you and with each other
Mhm.
is going to help stabilize, it's going to build new relationships and connections of
Mhm.
support.
Mhm.
Um, weave a new tapestry of community,
Mhm.
even if it's
Mhm.
online only, it's something. It's
Mhm.
something. And I think, yeah, the more we're not in that just purity of alarm, I think the more able we are to kind of hold that on the one hand, this, and on the other hand, this other thing, where we're going to be able to see from different points of view. And we still are going to want our frameworks. Like
Mhm.
for me, this process, and this is not going to be for everyone, but for me, because of my life story, this has meant me returning to Christianity and the comfort that
Mhm.
I've gotten from that in different levels. We I just started going to a church that's more woke than I would like,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
I'm in a same-sex marriage, so I kind of, I have to find a welcoming place for my family, but I don't want everything else that comes with it often. So, but I but I'm starting to build new relationships. And in some of those relationships, honestly, I'm still not going to be able to talk about this stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, it's just in some of our relationships, we may never be able to see eye to eye on this.
It's part of the futility, though, isn't it? And it is
Yeah,
part of that capacity to hold the two very different things. And to know that people who believe completely differently, things that we think are crazy
Yeah.
or, completely wrong, and value the person that holds the beliefs,
Yeah.
that we can do both,
Yeah.
that we can have soft hearts and understand that everybody is just going through their own human experience.
Hmm. Yeah. So part of me is just wants to say to the moms who are experiencing this, the dark night of the soul, but also the separation from family, which,
Hmm.
some of that separation might not be pure relationships. It might be hierarchical, like
Right.
the people that you used to find rest with, who you felt cared for
That's so
by,
important. Yes.
that
Yes.
is, and even, but also the pure, we talk about the marriage as a horizontal, quote unquote, relationship between two
Hmm.
adults who can take turns caring for one another. Well, a lot of our friendships do that too.
Hmm.
It's there is the aspect of peer orientation culturally for many of us, that we are seeking those attachment needs to be met predominantly by peers,
Hmm.
which is what it is. Maybe not ideal, but we still find we're still cared for.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and so that is a huge loss. It is just such a huge loss. And so um yeah, so then it's like, yes, we have the potential to go back into losing ourselves if we are not at that higher level of maturation, where we can be together but separate, where we can still be individuals even when we're in a relationship. We do potentially risk that sort of, I'm just going to conform to this new peer group.
Hmm.
um so I think the question really is, can I develop these new relationships or maintain my old relationships while still maintaining myself, while still knowing that there's things that I have that are different, um, that are not just about conformity, um, with the new group. I don't know if that gets to these questions or not, but
Well, and I'm hearing, again, being mindful of the process, understanding where you are in the process, potentially.
yeah, you're right.
And so,
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
And
yes.
there's a term used in theory of positive disintegration, of perceiving a higher path.
Mm,
So I guess that's something else I would say, again, is to reinforce it does get better. I think
yeah,
if we believe this is how it's going to be like this forever now,
yeah,
um, that can disrupt even maybe our maturation process, because we're going to get stuck again,
yeah,
but having models of people who have moved through
yeah, to
to a point where they're not experiencing this same loneliness and isolation anymore,
yeah, yeah,
knowing that that is on the other side of what you are moving through right now,
yeah,
is more of a sense of stability and care and rest that
yeah,
that may be hard to find in your environment right now. And
yeah.
that's part of the process. Even that isolation and loneliness, you know, uh, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey is another way to describe what people are going through right now. Um,
Definitely,
and this is,
definitely.
yeah, one of the challenges, right? This is part of the cycle. Go
And
ahead.
it takes me back to what we talked about last episode about individuation.
Yes.
When I took the Neufeld adolescent course,
Hmm.
you know, he lays out kind of like, at minimum two, maybe even three sort of pathways through adolescent. And Only one of them involves actual individuation. It's actually quite rare. But when I saw that pathway and the way that he described it, where we have to face a void,
Yes. Yes.
we have to face an attachment void, we have to do that separating. Now, in our culture, we confuse that with peer orientation for adolescents. So it what we see happening often is actually not what we think is happening. But when I heard that, it was like, okay, wow, I went through adolescence in my 40s. That's what I took from that. I
Mm-hmm.
was like,
Mm.
oh, I
Mm-hmm.
finally individuated just last year, you know?
Isn't it funny
Um,
then that Jung calls this process individuation?
right.
This
So,
midlife work is what he calls it because we're individuating from the
yeah,
culture.
yeah. And we have to face a void.
Yes.
We have to, and that's alarming.
Mm-hmm.
It is sad,
Mm-hmm.
melancholy,
Mm-hmm.
and it is lonely.
Mm-hmm. And it's the only way to build the capacity. Mm-hmm.
To come back together
Mm-hmm.
with those we love while being our own separate individual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Togetherness and separateness. And that is integrity, right? We
Mm-hmm.
talk about integrity, and this gets to a future question. I think that this just kind of boom, light bulb just went off as I'm saying this. When he speaks to that integrity, it is about being in relationship to others while still maintaining our sense of being a separate individual. It's kind of that both and. Um,
Yeah.
that's the territory.
Yes. Yes. And I'm looking at the time.
Yep.
You and I knew we wouldn't have time to answer all of these.
Yeah.
I do, we were talking about going in order, but I'm going to jump ahead
Okay.
because I think we can bring one more future question back into, I think, what has been a pretty themed conversation about
Mm-hmm.
mom's maturity, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is this one that it's just enmeshment versus attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very curious about your thoughts. My theory here is enmeshment is more of when we are not in the alpha role and we're expecting our
Mm.
children to be mindful of our needs
Yeah.
and we're pursuing them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We're seeking
We're
them to
seeking. We're in the
provide, to take
seeker
care of
role.
us. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's really a helpful way to look at it. Yep.
And so um, we've got questions about what does maturity look like, which we've spent a lot of time on today. Um,
Mm-hmm. I can I just read this one? Because I think it'll be
yes.
a somewhat I think we've already answered it, but let's read it out loud. What does
And it'll help
maturity
us
look like?
summarize. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes,
Hmm.
perfect. And we can kind of close after this. So, what
Hmm.
does maturity look like? i.e., able to pay mortgage on time or being generous in spirit in a difficult situation. There are many references to growing up, and I'm not sure if there is an end point. What does maturity look like? Are we still possibly growing or maturing up to our final days?
Hmm.
I think yes,
Hmm.
we are.
And I think we do go on that hero's journey.
Yeah,
And I think what our elders are, our wise elders are those who
yeah,
have faced the void
yep, yep,
and have that wisdom to share with us,
exactly.
and who we could look to as the alphas
Yes,
of the of society
yes,
if we knew to value them more than
exactly. And that
we
they
do
would
right
value
now.
themselves.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And I would just say yes, maturity does look like both being able to pay a mortgage
Hmm.
on time and being generous in spirit in difficult situations, stretching to be that we talked about last week over and over again. I feel like that generous invitation, like the reaching those arms out and just being like, I am big enough to hold this for my child. Um, I think it's both. It's both that, and honestly, that this idea of paying a mortgage on time, it gets to this idea of the mixed feelings, that prefrontal cortex integration, because that's when this I feel like anyone in your group or on who's going to listen to this, whoever listens to Jordan Peterson, he talks about this idea of like, I can sacrifice the short term, the
Mm,
immediate
hmm
gratification for a long-term goal. So this idea of paying a mortgage on time kind of taps into that for me.
hmm
That ability to um, what we call the work, well, we're getting to a new construct here, this work mode. I'm doing something for a longer term outcome.
hmm
That is a part of maturity. It is. So I just want to say yes, being able to say, well, I really want to do this right. I really don't want to pay the mortgage because I want to go, garden, which I do. I do want to do that. But I know I got to do it for this bigger picture, this that is an aspect of maturity
Well, and
as well.
isn't that
Yeah.
interesting that it takes us back to kind of where you started about mom being able to put aside her wants to be able to take care of the child's needs,
Yeah.
right? And so it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been, I guess what I just want to say is thank you all again. This has been an awesome invitation to conversation, an invitation to further reflection. And thank you for trusting us with your vulnerability, with your questions. And I look forward
Mm-hmm.
to our next continuing to answer and discuss what remains.
Yes, there are more questions, again, more thoughtful questions that we intend to get to that will really help to reinforce some of the attachment concepts and understand what they look like in practice. Um, yeah, I'm looking forward to tackling others. I might tease a little bit of what, some of the topics that we imagine are going to come up. And neurodiversity definitely is a theme in some of the questions that we didn't get to today. So we'll be tackling that. Psychological intimacy, which is the sixth stage. And in fact, probably all of the stages. That is another question that is that is a theme is like, how do we ensure or do our best to provide the conditions? How do we provide the conditions for our children to move through all phases of attachment? And something that has been on my mind that you and I have talked about and know we need to address is the cultural obstacles to that. Just how much is stacked against us in being able to accomplish that. And so
Mhm.
that is something too that we will tackle as we move through the Q&A that is going to take a few episodes. So,
Sounds
yeah,
good.
we'll be back in 2 weeks with more question answering. So, are you going to go garden now?
No, I have to postpone my instant gratification. I got to go to work.
Okay, me too. We'll garden this weekend, right? So,
All right.
thank you for listening. We hope you take something of value from our conversation today. Please check out the show notes for additional resources, including a prompt for reflection. We welcome your feedback in the comments and hope you join us for the next episode of Attachment Matters.